Have you ever been so underestimated that it became your greatest weapon? Them. They called me the numbers guy, the boring one, the passionless, predictable drone who was good with a spreadsheet and not much else. My older brothers, Marcus and Julian, they were the stars. Marcus had the charisma, the $1 million smile that could charm investors out of their life savings. Julian had the killer instinct, the boardroom predator, who could smell weakness from a mile away. And me? I was Leonard. Good old reliable Leonard. The one who made the machine run while they took all the credit. For years, I was fine with that. It was the family business, and I believed in what we were building. I believed in my father. But when he died, I learned what my brothers truly believed in themselves. The final transfer cleared my account at 3:47 a.m. this morning. I was awake, of course. I've been awake at this hour for the better part of 2 years. I watched the confirmation message blink onto my screen. A simple string of text that represented the culmination of 730 days of silent, meticulous, all-consuming work. My inheritance, the fortune they stole from me, was finally home, and the Callahan Family Foundation, the philanthropic joke they'd saddled me with, was now nothing more than an empty shell, a hollowed-out carcass of goodwill with a balance of just over $1,000. Tomorrow, the auditors arrive, and my brothers, snug in their mansions, blissfully unaware, are about to discover what happens when you push the numbers guy too far. They thought they were punishing me by giving me the boring job. They had no idea they were handing me the keys to their destruction. It wasn't about revenge, until it was, and now, it's about to be over. My story doesn't start with a bang, but with the funereal quiet of a mahogany-paneled law office. It was a week after we buried our father. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, and the kind of grief that feels more like a business transaction. I sat in a leather chair that was too big for me, feeling like a child again, flanked by my 2 older brothers. Marcus, ever the performer, was affecting a look of somber responsibility, his jaw set, his expensive suit perfectly tailored. Julian just looked bored, tapping his pen on a legal pad, impatient to get to the part where he was officially crowned king. Mr. Albright, our father's lawyer for 40 years, cleared his throat. He was a kind man, a relic from an era of handshake deals and personal integrity, and he looked deeply uncomfortable. He read through the preamble of the will, the standard bequests to distant relatives and loyal staff. Then he got to the heart of it, the investment firm, Callahan and Sons, my father's life's work, my life's work. The will was simple, or it should have been. My father believed in fairness, in his own way. The firm was to be divided equally 3 ways, a third for Marcus, a third for Julian, and a third for me. I felt a knot in my stomach loosen. It was what Dad had always promised. But then Marcus cleared his throat, placing a hand on Mr. Albright's arm to stop him. He said, "Leonard, Julian and I had a long talk. We've been working with the lawyers on this, for the good of the family." He slid a new document across the table. It was thick, bound in blue, full of legalese I could understand all too well. It was a modification to the trust, an addendum they had convinced my father to sign in his final, pain-riddled days. Julian spoke for the first time, his voice flat and cold. "The firm needs strong, decisive leadership to navigate the transition, Leo. A 3-way split creates instability. Investors get spooked." He didn't look at me when he said it. He was looking at the city skyline, as if I were a minor detail in the corner of his vision. Marcus gave me his practiced, sympathetic smile, one he'd used 1,000 times to close a deal. He said, "We're not cutting you out, little brother. We would never do that. We're giving you one of the most important jobs of all, a real honor. You're going to be the new president of the Callahan Family Foundation, the charitable foundation, the family's tax shelter and PR machine." It was my father's pet project, a way to feel good about the ruthless capitalism that funded it. It was a place for photo ops and charity galas, run by a skeleton crew, and mostly on autopilot. It was, in their world, a retirement home for the irrelevant. I looked from Marcus's patronizing smile to Julian's dismissive glare. My 1/3 ownership of a billion-dollar firm, my birthright, my inheritance, was being swapped for a salaried position, managing a portfolio of donations. They weren't just taking my money, They were defining my worth. They were putting a price tag on me, and it was a fraction of what they believed they were worth. I was being told, in the politest, most legally binding way possible, to go sit in the corner, while the adults ran the world. They saw the numbers guy, but they never saw the man. And in that quiet mahogany-paneled room, with the smell of my father's memory fading, a different kind of number started crunching in my head. Not the kind that measures profits and losses, but the kind that measures injustice. It was a debt, and I decided then and there, in the silence that followed their grand pronouncement, that I would one day collect. The days that followed were a blur of quiet rage and forced smiles. I moved my things out of my office at the firm, the office where I'd spent a decade building the analytical models that became the company's bedrock, and into the ridiculously plush, sterile headquarters of the Callahan Family Foundation. It was in a separate building, a testament to how removed it was from the real business of making money. My brothers had chosen it, of course. It was all glass and white marble, a mausoleum of good intentions. They thought giving me a corner office with a panoramic view was a consolation prize, a pat on the head. In reality, it was a gilded cage, and the view only served to show me how far away I was from everything I had helped build. I tried to fight it. At first, I scheduled meetings. I prepared presentations, filled with charts and data, proving my value to the firm. I wanted to appeal to their logic, the one language I thought we all spoke. I showed them the revenue growth, directly attributable to my risk assessment algorithms. I showed them the market-beating returns on the portfolios I'd personally managed. Julian sat through my presentation with his arms crossed, his expression unchanging. When I finished, he just shrugged. He said, "That's all in the past, Leo. We appreciate your contributions, but the firm is moving in a new direction, a more aggressive, forward-facing direction." The implication was clear. I was the past. I was conservative, cautious, backward-facing. I was the brake pedal, and they were ready to slam on the gas. Marcus was worse. He'd listen with that infuriatingly patient look on his face, nodding along as if he were hearing the heartfelt concerns of a troubled employee. When I was done, he'd put a hand on my shoulder. "Leonard, you're thinking about this all wrong. This isn't a demotion. It's a promotion to the heart of Dad's legacy. His real legacy. Philanthropy. You're the face of our family's conscience, the face of their conscience." I was a human shield, a PR tool they could point to at cocktail parties. "See, we're not just sharks. My little brother, the saint, runs our foundation." It was a perfect, elegant solution for them. It neutralized me as a threat, stole my inheritance, and turned me into a marketing asset all in one clean legal maneuver. Every argument I made was met with the same circular gaslighting logic. "You're being too sensitive. You're not seeing the big picture. This is what's best for the Callahan name." What was I supposed to do? I could have shooed, I suppose. I could have dragged the family name through a messy public legal battle that would have taken years and cost millions. A battle I would likely lose. They had the better lawyers, and they had the document with our father's signature on it. Proving he was coerced or not of sound mind would have been a nasty uphill fight. I would have been painted as the greedy, disgruntled younger brother, trying to tarnish his own father's memory for a payday. They knew that. They had calculated it all. The low point came about a month in. I was working late, sitting in that silent marble office, staring at the city lights. I hadn't spoken to my brothers outside of terse emails for weeks. I was just a ghost in their machine. My personal accounts were fine. The salary they'd given me was generous, enough to live comfortably, but it was an allowance, a dog biscuit tossed to me from their table, and my inheritance, my rightful share of the company's profits, was being funneled into their lavish lifestyles. I'd see the society pages online. Marcus buying a yacht, Julian's wife wearing a diamond necklace worth more than my yearly salary. They were living my life, or at least, the life that should have been 1/3 mine. That night, I let myself truly feel the weight of it, the suffocating injustice. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was existential. They hadn't just stolen my money, they had stolen my past and my future. They had erased me from our family's story and rewritten me as a footnote. I put my head down on the cold, marble desk, and for the first time since my father's funeral, I cried. It wasn't a loud, sobbing cry. It was a quiet, hopeless leak, the kind of crying you do when you realize you are utterly, completely alone. And then, I heard them. The wall between my office and the adjacent boardroom was thick, but not thick enough. They must have been having a late meeting. I heard Marcus's booming laugh, and I froze. They were using the foundation's boardroom, my boardroom, for their own business. I crept to the wall, my heart pounding, and pressed my ear against the cool marble. Julian was talking. He said, "I still can't believe he bought it." The whole face of our family's conscience bit. I thought for sure he'd sue. Marcus laughed again. "Nah, not Leo. Where's the fight in him? He's a drone, a passionless drone. Give him a data set and a quiet room, and he's happy. What would he even do with $100 million? Probably put it in a low-yield index fund and stare at the quarterly reports. We're doing him a favor. We're giving him purpose. A drone, a passionless drone." Something inside me didn't break. It solidified. It turned from a hot, messy grief into something cold, hard, and perfectly clear. The tears stopped. My breathing steadied. I stood up from the desk and walked back to my chair, my movements calm and deliberate. I looked at the computer screen, at the complex, labyrinthine org chart of the Callahan Family Foundation that I had been tasked with managing. My father, for all his faults, had been a financial genius with a paranoid streak. To maximize tax benefits and protect the foundation from frivolous lawsuits, he'd structured it as a dizzying web of international entities. There was the main US-based 501c3, but under it were holding companies in the Cayman Islands, a sub-foundation for European art acquisition in Liechtenstein, and an educational trust in Switzerland. My brothers saw it as a headache, a tangled mess of paperwork. They'd never bothered to understand its architecture, but I understood it. I was the numbers guy, the drone, and as I stared at the lines and boxes connecting Delaware to Geneva to Grand Cayman, I saw it not as a web but as a plumbing system, a series of pipes, valves, and conduits designed to move vast sums of money across the globe with maximum discretion and minimal oversight. They had handed me the machine they didn't understand, assuming I would just keep it polished. They thought my passion was for numbers. They were half right. My passion was for order, for balance, and they had just created the single largest imbalance in my life. In that moment the plan wasn't fully formed, but the foundation was laid. They had given me my purpose. All right. It wasn't about revenge. It was about correction. It was about balancing the books. The most important audit of my life had just begun. The first 6 months were dedicated to pure, unadulterated study. I didn't make a single move. I became a monk, and the foundation's legal and financial documents were my sacred texts. I worked 16-hour days, not in a flurry of activity, but in quiet, intense absorption. I went home to my empty apartment, ate a simple dinner, and then opened the books again. My brothers saw my long hours as proof of their theory. I was the boring drone, happy in my little hive, organizing their charitable endeavors. They'd occasionally send a condescending email. "Heard you're really burning the midnight oil, Leo. Great work. The family appreciates your dedication." Every patronizing word was another drop of fuel on the cold fire inside me. I traced every dollar that had ever moved through the foundation since its inception. I learned the quirks of Swiss banking privacy laws, the reporting requirements for a Liechtenstein-based Stiftung, and the legal gray areas of art valuation for charitable donation purposes. My father had, perhaps unwittingly, created a financial masterpiece of complexity. It was designed to be impenetrable to a casual observer, and to my brothers, anything that didn't scream profit was casual. They saw a charitable foundation. I saw an international money-moving apparatus of breathtaking efficiency. My first real step was to establish an ally. I couldn't do this entirely alone. I needed someone on the inside, someone who was part of the foundation's history. That person was Clara Jensen. Clara had been my father's executive assistant for 30 years, before he'd moved her over to be the foundation's part-time administrator and bookkeeper. She was in her late 60s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a deep abiding loyalty to my father's original vision. She viewed Marcus and Julian as cheap knockoffs of the man she'd respected for decades. She was wary of me at first, assuming I was just another Callahan suit. I didn't try to win her over with charm like Marcus would have, or with intimidation like Julian. I used my own currency, competence. I started by asking her questions, not about the money, but about the charities themselves. I'd sit in her small, cluttered office, a stark contrast to my marble palace, and ask, Clara, this grant to the inner city music program in 2012, I see the paperwork, but tell me about the people. Did you ever meet the director? She'd eye me suspiciously, then her face would soften. She'd tell me stories about the kids, about the thank you letters my father used to keep in his desk. I spent weeks doing this, learning the soul of the foundation from the one person who still remembered it. I organized the archives, digitized the old records, and created a comprehensive database of every grant, every project, every human being the foundation had ever touched. I showed it all to Clara. For the first time, she looked at me with something other than polite tolerance. She saw a reflection of my father's meticulous nature. She said, "Your father would be proud, Leonard. He always said the details were where the truth lived. Your brothers, they only care about the photo ops." With Clara's trust secured, I had my unwitting accomplice. I began what I called the great professionalization. I told her that in order to maximize our impact and streamline our operations for the 21st century, we needed to consolidate some of our smaller, inefficient holdings and reinvest them in higher-yield global initiatives. It was perfect corporate jargon, the kind of language that sounds impressive, but means whatever you want it to. To her it sounded like I was finally bringing some much-needed order to the chaos. She was thrilled. She would get me any file, any historical document I needed, believing we were on the same noble mission. The second ally I needed was a conscious one. I called my old college roommate David Chen. We'd been through a brutal quantitative finance program together. While I went into the family business, he'd gone to law school and now specialized in the very specific, very murky world of international asset management. I met him for a drink at a quiet bar downtown. I didn't tell him the whole truth. Not at first. I framed it as a hypothetical. I said, "Dave, imagine a scenario. There's a family foundation, very complex, with international arms, and imagine the person running it believes the foundation's capital is being underutilized. He wants to move assets from a US entity to, say, a European one, to fund a major long-term acquisition, art maybe. How would one do that in the most legally sound, tax-efficient, and discreet way possible?" David swirled the ice in his glass, his legal mind immediately seeing the puzzle. He started talking about treaties, about leveraging different reporting requirements, about how a grant to a wholly owned foreign sub-foundation is, for all intents and purposes, just moving money from your left pocket to your right pocket. But across a border, he said, the key is justification. As long as every transaction is meticulously documented and serves the foundation's stated mission, you can do almost anything. You want to move $50 million to Liechtenstein to buy a Picasso? Fine. You just need the purchase agreement, the valuation paperwork, and a board resolution. If the person running the show is the board, or has sole authority, then they're just signing off on their own plan. It's an ironclad loop. Then he looked at me, a shrewd glint in his eye. "This isn't a hypothetical, is it, Leo?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. The will, the meeting, the passionless drone comment. I laid the whole sordid story out on the table. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. I thought he was going to tell me I was crazy, that I was risking jail time. Instead, he slowly nodded. He said, "They used a legal document, an addendum to the trust, to screw you. It was theft, but with a lawyer's signature on it. So you using the foundation's own legal structure to reclaim what's yours." He took a long sip of his drink. "It's not a crime, Leo. It's poetry. I won't be your official counsel on this. I can't, but I can answer your hypothetical questions, as a friend." And so the plan was truly born. For the next 18 months, I executed it with the patience of a sniper. The hidden leverage wasn't a single secret or a piece of blackmail. It was the sheer mind-numbing complexity of the system my brothers ignored. The first move was a board resolution, signed only by me, authorizing the foundation to explore major acquisitions in post-war European art. It was perfectly aligned with my father's interests. Clara helped me draft it, proud that I was taking up his mantle. Then came the wire transfers. Not one big one, but hundreds of smaller ones. They were grants, legitimate, documented grants from the US Foundation to the Liechtenstein Stiftung für Europäische Kunst. a sub-entity that my father had set up years ago and forgotten about. From the US side, it looked like we were spending millions on our charitable mission. The reports I filed were thick with artistic jargon and acquisition strategy. My brothers never read them. Once the money was in Liechtenstein, a country known for its financial privacy, the second phase began. The Stiftung didn't buy a Picasso. Instead, it began to make a series of investments. It would purchase a minority stake in a private art gallery in Zurich, a gallery that I had quietly established through a shell corporation. It would pay exorbitant consulting fees to a firm in the Cayman Islands for market analysis, a firm that was another one of my shells. Each step was a legal transaction, a grant, an investment, a service payment. The money was being cleaned, not by washing it, but by passing it through a series of legitimate-looking doors. From the Caymans, the money would finally land, as investment returns or consulting profits, into a final, anonymous trust I had set up under a completely different name, my name. It was a slow, agonizing process of bleeding the foundation dry. I was siphoning off my inheritance, dollar by dollar, plus interest. The number I had in my head was precise, my 1/3 share of the firm's valuation on the day of my father's death, plus a conservative 8% annual return for the 2 years of lost opportunity. I was a numbers guy, after all. I was going to make myself whole down to the last cent. The stress was immense. I lost weight, I barely slept. I lived in constant fear of a single misstep, a single bank compliance officer asking one question too many. But every time the fear crept in, I would hear my brothers' voices in my head, a passionless drone, and I would go back to the numbers, my focus absolute. They thought I was tending a garden. I was dismantling a bomb, piece by piece, and reassembling it in their living room. After nearly 2 years of silent, meticulous work, the foundation's primary accounts were almost dry. The money, my money, was safe in a constellation of private accounts under my control. The time for defense was over. It was time to go on the offensive. The plan had been about recovery, but now it shifted to completion. For the final part of my plan to work, I needed them to panic. I needed to rattle their cage. The first move was subtle, designed to be an irritant, a stone in their shoe. Marcus's wife, a woman whose primary occupation was spending my brother's money, was the chairwoman of the annual Starlight Gala, a ridiculously opulent fundraiser that was in reality a party for her friends funded almost entirely by a massive grant from the Callahan Foundation. The request landed on my desk, as it did every year, a simple 1-page form asking for a $2 million grant. For years, it had been rubber-stamped. This time, I denied it. I didn't make a scene. I simply sent a polite formal email back to Marcus's wife with Marcus and Julian copied. I wrote, after a thorough review of the Foundation's current strategic initiatives, particularly our significant and binding capital commitments to our European art acquisition program, we are unfortunately unable to allocate funds to the Starlight Gala this fiscal year. We wish you the best of luck in your fundraising efforts. The fallout was immediate. My phone rang within minutes. It was Marcus. He wasn't yelling, not yet. He was in his charming, confused mode. He said, Leo, hey, I think there's been some kind of mistake. You denied the gala funding. He laughed. A strained, artificial sound. I think you might have clicked the wrong button. I kept my voice calm and professional, as if I were speaking to a vendor. No mistake, Marcus. As I stated in the email, our liquid assets are fully committed. The board, and I let that hang in the air. The board, being just me, has prioritized long-term, high-value international projects. A one-night gala doesn't fit the new strategic direction. There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, the confusion warring with his innate arrogance. He finally said, New strategic direction? What new strategic direction? You can't just change the direction. That gala is a family tradition. It's a foundation tradition. I corrected him gently, and the foundation's priorities have been updated. I sent you and Julian the 40-page strategic overview last month. It was all in there. Of course, I knew they hadn't read it. It was a masterpiece of boring, impenetrable corporate speak that I had David, my lawyer friend, help me craft. It was designed to be ignored. Marcus sputtered, 40 pages. Who has time to read a 40-page report about a charity? Just approve the damn grant, Leonard. I'm afraid I can't do that, Marcus. My fiduciary duty is to the Foundation's charter, not to family traditions. I hung up before he could respond. That was the first tremor. The second came a week later, and it hit Julian. Julian had a taste for expensive cars, and he'd long been using a loophole to have the firm buy them, then donate them to the Foundation as charitable transportation assets, which he would then use exclusively. It was flagrantly unethical, but no one had ever called him on it. He just purchased a new Aston Martin and had the bill sent as usual to the Foundation for payment. The check bounced. This time, the call wasn't charming. It was Julian, and his voice was ice. "What the hell is going on, Leonard?" "I'm sorry, Julian. You'll have to be more specific. I'm reviewing our Q3 performance metrics and don't play dumb with me." "The check for my car. The dealership called me. They said the Foundation's account has insufficient funds. It's a $60,000 check." "How is that possible?" I feigned surprise. "Insufficient funds. That's highly irregular." "Let me see." "Ah, I see the problem. You've submitted this as a capital expenditure, but our capital accounts are fully engaged in the European art market right now. There's a liquidity issue." "A liquidity issue?" Julian's voice was rising. "It's a multi-billion-dollar foundation, Leonard. What do you mean there's a liquidity issue? Where is all the money? As I detailed in the quarterly reports, it's not gone, it's invested. Tied up in long-term high-value assets. It's the responsible thing to do, fiscally. To be honest, I'm surprised you and Marcus were so comfortable leaving so much of the Foundation's capital sitting in a low-yield checking account for so long. It was fiscally irresponsible. I've corrected that." I could hear him breathing heavily into the phone. The numbers guy was speaking his language, but using it against him. I had taken their own logic of aggressive financial management and applied it to the one entity they considered a passive piggy bank. He said, "I want a full financial review, now. I want to see every account, every transaction." "Of course," I said. "I'll have my assistant send over the last 3 quarterly reports. It's all in there. They're quite detailed. I'm sure a man with your financial acumen will find them illuminating." The panic was no longer a tremor, it was a palpable earthquake. They didn't know the truth yet. They couldn't possibly imagine the money was actually gone. They thought I had just tied it up in some bureaucratic knot, that I'd locked the safe and hidden the key out of spite. Their arrogance blinded them to the real possibility. They saw this as a power play, a pathetic attempt by their little brother to feel important. They still thought they were in control. They were about to learn, in the most abrupt way possible, that they were wrong. They demanded a meeting. The final confrontation was set. The week leading up to the meeting was a masterclass in their manipulative tactics. The power had shifted, and they could feel it, but they didn't understand how. They were like bullies on a playground, who suddenly found their usual victim refusing to flinch. Their first response was to escalate. They showed up at my office unannounced. The two of them, Marcus and Julian, striding into my white marble sanctuary like conquering heroes returning to a rebellious province. Clara, my loyal bookkeeper, stood up from her desk, her expression a mixture of fear and defiance. I gave her a calm nod, and she reluctantly sat back down. Julian didn't bother with pleasantries. He threw a thick file on my desk. It was the quarterly report I'd sent him. He said, "I read this, all of it. It's gibberish. Art acquisitions? Consulting fees to some shell in the Caymans? What is this, Leonard?" I leaned back in my chair, keeping my hands clasped behind my head, a posture of relaxation that I knew would infuriate them. I said, "It's called managing a global philanthropic portfolio, Julian. It's complex. Lots of moving parts. I wouldn't expect you to understand the nuances." Marcus stepped forward, playing the good cop. His smile was stretched thin, a desperate imitation of its usual confident charm. "Leo, enough with the games. This has gone on long enough. You made your point. You're upset. We get it. But you're endangering the family's reputation. The audit is in a week. We need to show liquidity. We need you to unwind these, whatever these are." I looked at him. "Games? Marcus, I'm doing my job, the job you gave me. I'm maximizing the Foundation's impact. I'm honoring Dad's legacy. Isn't that what you wanted?" I was using their own words, their own hollow justifications, and firing them back like bullets. Julian lost his patience. He leaned over the desk, his face inches from mine. He ceased. We are the board. You work for us. You will do as you are told, or we will fire you. Actually, you can't. My calm statement hung in the air. Julian's eyes narrowed. What did you say? I swiveled my chair to my computer and pulled up a document on the screen. I turned the monitor towards them. It was a scanned copy of the Foundation's original charter, signed by our father 20 years ago. I had a single clause highlighted. I said, Dad was a smart man. He worried about instability. According to Article 7, Section 4, the acting president of the Foundation has sole and absolute operational authority. The board's power is limited to an annual review and advisement capacity. The board can recommend a change in leadership, but it can only be enacted after the successful completion of the annual audit. He put it in there to prevent a hostile takeover, or someone running the Foundation into the ground for personal gain. Ironic, isn't it? The color drained from Marcus's face. Julian just stared at the screen, his jaw working silently. They were trapped by our father's foresight and their own ignorance. They had never bothered to read the fine print of the toy they'd given me to play with. The failed ambush was followed by a desperate campaign of counter-manipulation. The phone calls started. First came the threats from Julian, vague promises of legal and personal ruin. Then came the pleading from Marcus. He called me late one night, his voice thick with fake sentimentality. He said, I've been thinking about Dad, Leo, about when we were kids. Remember that fishing trip to the lake? When you fell in, and I pulled you out. We've always had each other's backs. We're brothers. Whatever this is, we can fix it. Family is all that matters. It was a nice story, except I was the one who had pulled him out. He had been showing off, rocking the boat, and had tipped it over. I had to tow him back to shore while he cried. It was a perfect, telling metaphor for our entire lives. My memory was a bit clearer than his. I said, You're right, Marcus. We are brothers. And you and Julian took my inheritance, pushed me out of our father's company, and called me a passionless drone behind my back. So please, save the fireside chats. My memory is just fine. The final phase of their campaign was an appeal to their last bastion of authority, guilt. They enlisted their wives, who called me to talk about the family name, about the public embarrassment, about how I was tearing the family apart. It was a coordinated, pathetic assault, but it was like throwing pebbles at a fortress. The man they were trying to manipulate, the accommodating, quiet Leonard, they thought they knew, no longer existed. He had been replaced by a man with a plan. A man who had spent 2 years sharpening his resolve into a razor's edge. They had no power over me anymore. The money was gone, their legal authority was a mirage, and their emotional appeals were landing on barren ground. All that was left was the final act. They called one last meeting. The day before the audit, they summoned me to their turf, the main boardroom, at Callahan & Sons, the very room where my life had been dismantled, 2 years earlier. It was time to show them what I had built from the rubble. The walk into the Callahan & Sons building felt different this time. 2 years ago, I had walked out of here feeling like a ghost, my presence erased. Today I felt solid. I felt a cold, calm certainty that I hadn't known my entire life. I was no longer a supporting character in their story. I was the author of my own. They were all there, waiting for me in the boardroom. Marcus, Julian, and a man I didn't recognize in an expensive suit, who had to be their lawyer. The atmosphere was thick with a tension that was almost suffocating. It was the same long, polished mahogany table, the same view of the city skyline, the same stage, but the actors had changed their roles. Marcus started, dispensing with any pretense of friendliness. His face was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He said, Leonard, this has to end. Today, we have a deal on the table. Their lawyer slid a document across the table. It was a severance agreement, a very generous one. It offered me a lump sum payment, a multi-million-dollar golden parachute, in exchange for my immediate resignation as president of the foundation, and a signature on a sweeping non-disclosure agreement. They were trying to buy me off. They still thought this was about money. They still thought the foundation's assets were just tangled, not gone. They believed if they gave me a big enough check, I would unlock the funds, save them from the audit, and disappear quietly. I looked at the agreement. I saw the number, It was a lot of money, but it was less than a tenth of what they had stolen from me. It was their final insulting valuation of my silence. I pushed the document back across the table. No thank you. Julian slammed his hand on the table, making the water glasses jump. Don't be a fool, Leonard. Take the deal. This is your last chance. I didn't look at him. I looked at their lawyer. I said, is it your professional advice that your clients should be attempting to bribe a foundation president into violating his fiduciary duty the day before a federal audit? It sounds problematic. The lawyer's face went rigid. He knew exactly what I was implying. He was now party to their conspiracy. I reached into my briefcase. I didn't pull out a thick file or a complex report. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the polished surface of the table until it stopped right in front of Marcus. It was a bank statement, a simple one-page summary statement for the Callahan Family Foundation's primary holding account, printed that morning. Marcus picked it up. He stared at it. His brow furrowed in confusion. He passed it to Julian. Julian stared at it. Then he looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horrified comprehension that was more satisfying than any amount of money. The statement showed the foundation's current total liquid assets. The balance read $1,427.18. Marcus finally found his voice. It was a weak, croaking sound. What is this? A joke? Where is the money? It's not a joke, I said, my own voice even and steady. And the money is gone. Gone where? Julian demanded, his voice shaking. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. For the last 2 years, I have been aggressively pursuing our foundation's stated mission. As per the strategic plan I sent you, which you both ignored, I liquidated our stagnant, underperforming domestic assets. I moved the capital into a series of high-yield, strategic international initiatives designed to honor our father's passion for European art and global education. I spoke calmly, using their own empty corporate language. I described the grants to the Liechtenstein Stiftung. I described the investments in the Zurich art market. I described the fees paid for expert consultation. I never used the words shell company. I never used the word trust. I simply laid out a perfectly legal, meticulously documented, 2-year-long philanthropic endeavor. I concluded, every dollar was spent in accordance with the Foundation's charter. Every transaction is accounted for. The Foundation is, by any measure, a model of philanthropic efficiency. It has successfully spent itself down to almost zero in pursuit of its goals. The lawyer looked like he was going to be sick. He understood what Marcus and Julian, in their panic, still hadn't fully grasped. He knew what this meant. Julian was still catching up. He snarled, "You funneled it. You stole it." I looked him right in the eye. "You'll find no evidence of that, Julian. The paper trail is immaculate. The money went from the Foundation to a series of other charitable and artistic enterprises, all legally registered. What happened to it after that? Well, that's not the concern of the Callahan Foundation. Our mission was complete. Now, about that audit tomorrow, and that's when the bomb truly detonated in their minds." I continued. "The auditors from the IRS are scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. They are going to review the books of a major philanthropic organization that just 2 years ago held assets in the hundreds of millions. Today it has less than $2,000. They are going to ask questions. They are going to wonder how that could happen. And when they start digging, they might look into the Foundation's past expenditures. They might wonder about certain administrative fees. They might ask for the logs on certain transportation assets. They might wonder why the CEO's wife's parties were funded by charitable grants. Any irregularities in your past use of Foundation funds will surely come under intense scrutiny." The color drained completely from their faces. They saw it, now. The trap. I hadn't just taken the money. I had turned the Foundation into a weapon, aimed directly at them. It wasn't a shield anymore. It was a Trojan horse, and the auditors were the army inside. Their attempts to skim from the Foundation, which they'd done for years, would now look like part of a massive deliberate scheme to defraud the government. The emptied accounts made their petty sins look like capital crimes. I stood up, my chair making a quiet scraping sound on the floor. I straightened my tie. "I believe my work here is done. The Callahan Family Foundation is all yours. brothers. Its presidency reverts to the board in the event of my resignation, which I am tendering, effective immediately. I picked up my briefcase. Good luck with the audit. I walked out of that boardroom, leaving behind a silence so profound it was like the air had been sucked from the room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The image of their faces, a mask of pure, unadulterated terror, was burned into my memory. It was the final number in a long and complex equation, and the books were finally perfectly balanced. The fallout was exactly what you'd expect. It was a controlled demolition, and I had a front row seat from a safe distance. The audit was a catastrophe for my brothers. Just as I predicted, an empty foundation was a massive red flag. The IRS investigation was swift and brutal. It uncovered years of their petty embezzlement, the cars, the parties, the personal expenses disguised as administrative fees. In the context of the foundation's sudden insolvency, these weren't seen as minor infractions. They were seen as evidence of a pattern of systematic fraud. The firm, Callahan and Sons, was built on an image of integrity and philanthropic goodwill. That image shattered overnight. Clients fled in droves. The scandal was all over the financial news. Their names, the proud Callahan name they were so desperate to protect, became synonymous with greed and corruption. They were forced to sell the company for pennies on the dollar to a larger competitor, just to cover their legal fees, and the massive fines levied by the government. The mansions were the next to go, then the yachts, the sports cars, the country club memberships. Their wives, who had married into a dynasty, quietly filed for divorce, unwilling to stick around for the collapse. The most delicious irony was watching them turn on each other. Marcus blamed Julian for being a reckless bully. Julian blamed Marcus for being a charismatic fool who was too busy preening to see what was happening under his own nose. They had built their partnership on a shared sense of superiority. When that was gone, there was nothing left but resentment. The last I heard, they were living in rented apartments, suing each other over the scraps. And me, I was free. I took my inheritance, the money I had so meticulously reclaimed, and I left. I moved to a quiet coastal town where no one knew the Callahan name. I didn't buy a mansion or a yacht. I didn't need to. That was their definition of success, not mine. I bought a modest house with a view of the ocean. I started a small independent financial advisory firm. I have a handful of clients, people who I help build real sustainable futures. My work is honest. My life is quiet. I spend my mornings drinking coffee on my porch, watching the waves roll in. The constant rhythmic sound is a soothing balm. It's the sound of order, of balance. For 2 years I lived with a knot of tension in my gut so tight I forgot what it felt like to breathe normally. Now that knot is gone. They called me passionless. They were wrong. My passion wasn't for the things they valued, the status, the luxury, the applause. My passion was for justice. It was for the elegant, satisfying click of a complex system settling into its correct state. They created a profound imbalance in the world, my world, and I used the very tools they gave me to set it right. They saw the numbers guy, but they never saw the man who loved his father, but loved fairness more, the man who understood that sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one you should be paying attention to. It was never really about the money. It was about respect. It was about them looking at me and seeing an equal, a brother. By the time they finally saw me, it was too late. They were looking up at me from the bottom of a hole they had dug for themselves. So I'll ask you, what would you have done? Would you have taken the severance check and walked away? Would you have fought them in court, dragging your family through the mud? Or would you have done what I did? Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't a loud explosion. It's a silent, meticulous, and perfectly executed correction. It's simply balancing the books. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever had to fight to be seen for who you truly are, I want to hear about it. Share your story in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and they deserve to be heard. And if you enjoyed watching the scales of justice finally find their balance, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are a lot of stories out there about people finally getting exactly what they deserve, and I've got plenty more to tell.